What if I told you that a 1,500-year-old legal text holds this incredible detective story, all about the nature of perfection? Well, today we're diving deep into an ancient investigation where the central clue is a single perfect cut. But we actually start with a question that seems to go against everything we know. Imagine you're in a time of total chaos, a long, brutal war. In a situation like that, could fundamental rules, like the laws of keeping kosher, just get put on hold? That exact problem was at the heart of a puzzle posed about 1,500 years ago by a sage named Rabbi Yirmiyahu. He was looking back at a really unique and chaotic time in history, the Jewish people's journey into the land of Israel. Okay, so this meat of stabbing. It sounds intense, right? It was basically a special allowance for soldiers during wartime, letting them eat meat that wasn't prepared by the normal kosher rules. So Rabbi Yirmiyahu's brilliant question was, what happens to the leftovers? Once the war is over and things are back to normal, does that special permission just expire? Is the meat suddenly forbidden, or is it still okay to eat? And get this, they couldn't figure it out. They actually declared it a taiku, which basically means the question stands. In a tradition that's all about finding answers, this is a huge deal. It's like them saying, you know what, this one's just too complex. It shows just how tricky things get when law, ethics, and history all collide. So if that whole wartime thing was the really tricky exception, it makes you wonder, right? What are the normal rules anyway? To get why the exception is so hard, we first have to understand the baseline for what makes a perfect kosher cut. The baseline rules for shechita, or kosher slaughter, are actually way broader than you might think. Almost anyone can do it, pretty much anywhere, and with almost anything that's sharp enough to cut cleanly. But, and this is a big but, there are two very specific exceptions that get to the absolute heart of our investigation. You can't use a serrated sickle or a saw. And that second one, the saw, is where our mystery really begins. And this brings us right to the main event. I mean, think about it. Why not a saw? What's the big deal with that serrated edge that makes the whole thing invalid? This simple question kicked off a really fascinating investigation into what exactly makes a blade flawed. So, enter the father of a great sage named Shmuel. You can think of him as like an early experimental researcher. He would literally, on purpose, create flawed knives and then send them to the great scholars asking, hey, what about this flaw? Does this one count? He was basically stress testing the law to find its absolute breaking point. The answer that came back was foundational. The problem with a saw isn't just that it's bumpy, it's that it's designed to tear. A kosher slaughter demands a seamless, clean slice. It's a principle that's all about minimizing pain and showing respect. Anything that rips or tears or even presses too hard on the vital organs makes the whole thing invalid. The core idea is simple: slice, don't rip. But of course, the sages didn't just stop with that simple rule. And this is what's so fascinating. They then broke it down with almost surgical precision. This is where the real detective work starts. They came up with two main types of notches. First, there's an ogeret, which means it catches, because it has two sharp edges like a tiny hook. That one's a definite no-go, clearly unfit. But then there's the second type, a mesukhsekhet, an entangling notch. This one only has one sharp edge. And at first, the ruling was that this one was actually fine. But then, the sages hit them with a brilliant follow-up question that just changes everything. They said, wait a minute. A kosher slaughter involves moving the knife back and forth. So, what happens to that entangling notch when you change directions? Okay, this is so cool. On the pull stroke, the dull side of the notch just glides by harmlessly. The cut is clean. But on the push stroke, that single sharp edge is now leading the way and it rips the tissue. All of a sudden, the exact same knife becomes valid or invalid based entirely on which way it's moving. The level of detail here is just astounding. So, with all this complicated back and forth, the debate really needed a resolution, and it came from one of the greatest sages of the Talmud, a man named Rava. He steps in to create a clear, final framework that could be applied to any situation. Rava just distills all of this incredibly detailed analysis down to three clear and distinct categories. It's just a masterclass in bringing clarity to a really complex problem. And here they are. First, the ogeret. That two-sided catching notch, absolutely forbidden. It will always tear, so the slaughter is invalid. Second, that tricky one-sided entangling notch. You shouldn't use a knife like that But if you did, the slaughter might be valid after the fact. We'll get to why in a second. And third, he introduces a new category, a smooth, wave-like imperfection with no sharp edges. Rava rules this is perfectly fine, even to use from the start. So this totally solves the puzzle of that second entangling notch. How can it be valid only after the fact? Because its validity depends entirely on what the slaughterer actually did. If they somehow managed to complete the cut with a single one-way pull, it's valid. But if they used a standard back-and-forth motion, it's invalid. It's this subtle but crucial distinction between the tool itself and the technique used. All right, so for our final thought, we move beyond just the mechanics of it all. This entire investigation has been about flaws and imperfections. But the text ends by asking a much deeper question. What's the difference between what's just permissible and what's perfect? What is the true ideal? Another sage, Rav Acha, poses one last, almost poetic question to his colleague Rav Ashi. He asks, what about a blade that isn't perfectly smooth, but also has no real sharp-edged notches? He compares it to an awn of grain, something with a natural, superfine texture. Is that okay? And Rav Ashi's response is just beautiful. He doesn't just say yes. He says, who will give us meat from that knife so we can eat it? It's a statement of real yearning. He's saying a blade with that subtle texture isn't just permissible, it's the ideal. It grips just enough to make sure you get a swift, perfect slice without any tearing. And so our 1,500-year-old investigation doesn't just end with a rule, but with this profound meditation on the endless pursuit of perfection.